All right, welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I'm Rico Rutia, here with my co-host, Brian Pfeiffer.
Good evening, listeners. We're here tonight to talk to Jesus Rodriguez Espinoza from Venezuela. But before we do, we would like to give a background, just real quick, on what's happening in Venezuela and an introduction to who Brother Jesus is. So the United States government and its imperialist allies is doing all in its power to oust President Nicolas Maduro following his successful election to a third term, which took place on July 28th. CIA-sponsored opposition forces have taken to the streets, setting fires and attacking progressive people. The world capitalist media is howling while the U.S. is recognizing the loser of the election, a far-right counter-revolutionary. And we'll talk about that more. The Moratorium Now Coalition in Detroit is sponsoring a Zoom meeting August 12th with Brother Jesus to hear the truth of what was happening actually on the ground there in Venezuela. We are honored on this episode to have Brother Jesus Rodriguez Espinoza, an expert on international relations, Venezuelan politics, and communications. He served for several years as Consul General of Venezuela in Chicago. Before that, he was part of the foundational editorial team of Aparora.org. He is founder and editor of the Venezuela anti-imperialist news outlet. And he is here with us tonight, and we are greatly honored to have him with us. And welcome, Brother Rodriguez Espinoza.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Rick, for the invitation. I'm open to answer all the questions that you might have about elections and U.S. intervention. Okay,
for our listeners, that might not be familiar with Venezuela, Hugo Chavez took power in 1999, and there's a lot of history there and a lot of things that are happening. But just a general overall of what's happening in Venezuela with the elections, and maybe a little background for our listeners that might not be familiar with what's actually taking place there.
Yes, I mean, basically, Venezuelan constitution establishes that we have to have new elections every 6 years, presidential elections every 6 years, in order to elect the president that is going to, at least in this latest election, the president that's going to rule the country from 2025 until 2031. That is established in the Constitution. That is something that has not ever been skipped. Even before the Bolivarian Revolution and Chavismo came to power, and after the approval of the new constitution that President Hugo Chavez proposed, which is the constitution that right now, the Magna Carta that right now, guide the institutional life of Venezuela. So that's basically the reason that President Maduro, by I believe in February or March, not President Maduro, actually the National Electoral Council of Venezuela announced that we were going to have presidential elections for July 28th, which was like 10 days ago. So before that, and I believe that is important for people that are not used to Venezuelan, very complicated political life in recent years, especially with U.S. aggression. Before that, the U.S. government mainly has been trying to get rid of Chavismo. First, with President Hugo Chavez, and after Hugo Chavez's death, against President Maduro. So the U.S. has been trying to oust Chavismo out of power since day one of President Chavez in office. And I'm talking about 1999. So in 2002, they promoted a coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez that thankfully, and because of the pressure of the people, only lasted 47 hours. And then there has been replicas of, coup attempts or destabilization processes that has been repeated every other year in Venezuela. And they have intensified since President Maduro took power in 2013, when Hugo Chavez died. I mean, when President Hugo Chavez died in March 2013, a few weeks later, elections were called, and President Maduro was elected. And since then, the aggression against Venezuela has only intensified with the time, and with the arrival, I mean, at the end of President Obama, there was this executive order that declared Venezuela an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. security, and since then, the policy of sanctions against Venezuela has reached unheard levels. I mean, we are the second country right now in the world with more sanctions. I'm talking about 930 sanctions, according to what I remember. We are only surpassed by Russia, that has like 20-something thousand sanctions. The difference with the sanctions between Venezuela and against Venezuela and Russia is that the sanctions against Venezuela forbids Venezuela to open any, the U.S. basically forbidden all bank institutions around the world to allow Venezuelan entities to open bank accounts. So financially, they try to asphyxiate Venezuela. We have learned with the time that those sanctions, to how to bypass those sanctions, but the consequence of those sanctions has been terrible for the economic development of the country, of the social achievement of the Bolivarian Revolution. And that has been used by right-wingers to try to say that socialism is bad, that communism doesn't work. And that's basically the narrative that is not new. I mean, that they have used against Cuba, for example, or Nicaragua, or any other country that tries to have a different path and a sovereign, independent path, different than the path of just submitting to Washington interests. So that's the general, very brief background of the elections, and with that background, President Maduro, I have to say that the U.S. also put a bounty on President Maduro's head of $50 million if you kill President Maduro. And actually recently those mercenaries in the U.S., I forgot his name, are asking the U.S. government to increase the bounty to 100 million or 150 million to try to get rid of the Venezuelan problem in a fast track. So that's part of the environment. And you hear in the media that the Venezuelan government don't went into elections and try to somehow promoted unfair elections because we exercise power over the opposition, which is not true. But also, the one that is in worse conditions here is the Venezuelan government. And despite the worst conditions and the unbalance against the Venezuelan government, President Maduro decided to go to elections, and we held elections 10 days ago, and President Maduro won. The difference with these elections is that that after during the announcement of the first announcement of the results, the Electoral Council informed the country that we were also the CNE, the Electoral Authority, was heavily affected by a hacking attack, a cyber attack that was affecting the transmission of votes, and that somehow created some. And many of us in Venezuela believe that that's something that is not artificial. That's something that was planned by the right wingers and the U.S. government, because that serves them as an excuse to claim a few hours after the electoral results announcement to call for violence, to not recognize the result of the CNE that we were expecting, but we were not expecting that they were going to do that using the excuse of incongruencies, of lack of transparencies by the electoral authority, which is what they have been trying to do. So after that call that the right-wingers did in Venezuela, we had on Monday 29th and maybe on Tuesday the 30th of July, incidents of violence, riots. We call them guarimbas here in Venezuela, and and most of them were violent demonstrations against Chavista leaders, against public property, everything related to the government, and that was documented, even spread by Elon Musk a lot using his X platform, and also mixing, reality with fake news to try to overdimension an alleged massive response against the electoral results, which is a lie, because it has been proven that most of those that were behind the violence on Monday and Tuesday the 30th were most of them paid criminals belonging to criminal gangs that are traditional in Venezuela. Actually, the infamous Tren de Aragua that has been used by mainstream media to say that Venezuelan government is exporting guns to the U.S. and to Latin America. They publicly expressed their support to Maria Corina Machado and called for people going to the street to protest against the CNE. So that gives you an idea of what has been happening. I believe that I should stop here and let you make more questions.
Sure. Well, thank you, Jesus. Yeah, for my own benefit, quite frankly, and also for the benefit of our listeners, could you give us a little bit of a background of what U.S. and Venezuelan relations have been, I don't know, say for the last 100 years or so? Like, what's the nature of it? What is the U.S. interested in as far as Venezuela?
That's a good question. I'm going to try to be very brief, but it can be summarized saying that the U.S. government for more than a century have seen Venezuela like one of the main sources of oil. That's basically like a neo-colonial, state that is, I don't know how to say it in English, but is subordinated to the interests of the White House in Washington. And that's the way it was until Hugo Chavez took power. The first oil field that we discovered in Venezuela was like in 1909 or 1908. And a few years after that discovery, the gringo oil corporations began to exploit oil in Venezuela extensively. And that changed forever the economic structure of the country, that before that was mostly an agricultural country, an agricultural economy. A lot of people in the north complain about us Venezuelans not being able to to change the economic structure of the country and becoming a mono exporter country and all that kind of things that, but they usually don't understand that it was what the US needed us to be. And because we had, subservient governments before Hugo Chavez that only responded to the White House, there was no need or interest in changing that, economic structure. It was until Hugo Chavez came that he said that first he wanted to change the correlation of power in the oil exploitation production business, and he gave the Venezuelan government the majority shares in all the oil joint ventures that we had with transnational corporations, mainly U.S. oil corporations. And that, of course, created a big headache for the gringos. And that was one of the reasons behind the coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez in 2002. So basically, Chavismo came to power in 1999, like 90 years after the discovery of the first oil field in Venezuela. And he changed the equation. He began to ask for more royalties, to not give oil with discount to the U.S. I mean, all the colonial prerogatives that Washington has over Venezuela that basically make us a U.S. neo-colony, which is the reality in most of the Latin American countries right now, despite maybe Nicaragua and Cuba. So that's the reality. And besides oil, we have one of the biggest largest oil gas. I believe that is the fourth largest gas reserve in the world. We have one of the largest gold reserve in the world. Also, we have several strategic minerals like uranium, those new minerals that are very desired by corporations right now. I forgot the name, rare minerals. I believe that is the name of those minerals that right now are very in the appetite of most corporations. So the interest of the U.S. in Venezuela is not an interest on human rights, on democracy, or anything like that. It's just a geostrategic interest based on what I told you, on the availability of very strategic resources that we have in Venezuela, and the US and Europe needs a lot, and they want them cheap or maybe for free, as President Trump said a few months ago.
Thank you, Jesus. One follow-up question as well. So, and this is also for my own education and, for our listeners who may not know, as far as having a fair election, like what was the process? Were there observers? Were there witnesses? Anything like that? Could you speak to that a little bit?
That's important, yes. I mean, for these elections, we published in Orinoco Tribune a piece about, I believe that there were 1,600 journalists accredited formally by the Electoral Council of Venezuela to cover the elections. That's a lot of journalists, 1,600. And I believe that they were like 600 or 900. I believe that at the end there were in total 900 electoral observers from all over the world, and local observers. And when I talk about local observers and international electoral observers, I'm not talking about observers that are sympathetic to Chavismo. We had observers that are representative of countries that are not sympathetic or aligned with socialism or anything like that. We had observers from Carter Center that has been saying crazy stuff recently, but also from the African Union, electoral organizations from the region and from other continents. So many of them, the majority of them, have, after the elections, have explained and state that the transparency of the results is unquestionable, and that the process of the election before the election is unquestionable. And even a few years ago, even President Jimmy Carter, when he was in control of the Carter Center, said that the Venezuelan electoral system was the best electoral system that, I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying this. He said that it was the best electoral system that he witnessed, and I believe that he witnessed, like, I don't know, like hundreds of electoral systems during his life as head of the Carter Center. So the electoral system in Venezuela is extremely hard to vulnerate, to even under the current conditions that are very unusual, because never in the history of Venezuelan elections the CNE, the electoral authority that controls the electoral processes in Venezuela, receive a cyber attack of this magnitude. Even in these circumstances, the computer science experts that know about how the electoral system in Venezuela is built says that even in these circumstances, it's almost impossible to affect the integrity of the vote. What the CNE and Venezuelan authorities has been saying lately, after the announcement of this cyber attack, is that basically the cyber attack tried to affect the electronic voting transmission process, in that hackers somehow managed to falsify, or I don't know if that's the right word, but to trick the notes and the communication protocols that the transmission machine of voting transmission machines had with an isolated network created for that purpose. They basically saturated the endpoints that received the votes via I don't know how to explain it. It's complicated in English, but basically they try to affect the transmission, but the integrity of votes has never been compromised. And that's something that really is important to highlight, because mainstream media has been trying to portray that there might be a risk of a fraud behind the results announced by the Electoral Council in Venezuela. And again, that's almost impossible. I don't want to go into details because those are complicated terms that they use in the tech people use, and it's going to be harder even for me to translate them into English.
So, Jesus, and for the benefit of our listeners, just a little historical background if you might not be familiar with this, mostly, of course, for listeners here, because I'm going to preface something with a question for you. And the question essentially is going to be, it's quite remarkable in 25 years, the achievements that have been made under the Bolivarian Revolution, with all that you mentioned, the sanctions, the blockades, being deemed a so-called state sponsor of terrorism under the Obama administration. And preceding the Hugo Chavez leadership in 1999, taking power then, there was hundreds of years of Portuguese, British, and other colonialism, and all kinds of other neocolonialism, the Monroe Doctrine, etc. And as Rick mentioned last week, there's a book called Killing Hope by William Blum. There's all kinds of background information that we would encourage listeners to review if you're interested in that. But Jesus, can you explain to our readers why the imperialists are so angry, and why they want to wipe out the Bolivarian process especially since 1999, and in that, some of the advances that have been made with the help of Cuba, for example, in medical care, or the communes, or the housing program. That's not really that well known in the United States, some of the advances that have been made. Can you describe some of that?
Yes, as I already said, I mean, basically they are mad because they cannot control Venezuela the way they controlled it before. And that, of course, make it more difficult to the US to have access to our oil, to our resources, in the way they had it before. And of course, with all those resources, first President Hugo Chavez and then President Maduro has been trying to revert the way those resources were directed to, and instead of giving them to transnational corporation of the traditional Venezuela oligarchs that control the country, the government, the Chavista government, began a deep process of redistribution of wealth, of I mean, it's massive what Chavismo has been done to try to empower those that were forgiven in the governments before Hugo Chavez came to power. I'm talking about educational programs like Mission Robinson, which basically put Venezuela. But I mean, UNESCO recognized a few months after we finished Mission Robinson that we were a illiteracy-free country. And that happened just a few, I mean, it was in 2003 or 2000, in 2004, I believe that UNESCO recognized that after the government launched a massive program called Mission Robinson with the help of Cuba to promote literacy and to eradicate illiteracy. We created Misión Barrio Adentro, basically putting a small, healthcare clinics all over the country, also with the help of Cuban doctors, to provide first level assistance to people that never had the chance to go to a doctor, and that, of course, change the way Venezuelans see the government and social programs. Then the government launched Gran Misión Vivienda Venezuela, is in Spanish. It's a social program of housing, basically. And we have delivered more than 5 million houses to Venezuelans in the last, I believe that it was launched in 2012, so in the last 12 years. So social houses built by the government, or built between communes and the government with self-construction programs. They organize communities, make their projects to building houses, and the government help them, but they, develop most of the program. So this is a massive program that even during the sanctions, President Maduro have been able to keep alive. And like that, we have like hundreds, I'm not exaggerating, social programs launched by Chavismo to try to empower people. And if you ask me, and as you mentioned, the communes, the communal councils, basically with the new constitution approved in 1999, Venezuela created this that we call the communal power, which is basically the construction or deployment of communal councils, which is basically neighbors organized to solve their own problems. But above those communal councils, we created a new structure that we call commune, which is basically like a confederation, a sort of confederation of union of communal councils. So that basically created a network of communal communes all over the country that were able to receive funding not only by the government itself, but directly by a law that permits them to receive funding without the toll of the government. You know what I mean? Without the control of the government. Yes, by then proposing projects to improve the quality of light or to create productive units, I mean companies, if you want, if you want to call it that way, because people see the concept easily. But it's different than companies, the traditional capitalist companies that you know, because the revenues of those companies goes to improve the conditions of the commune or the communal council. So it's a complex framework that was created with the Bolivarian constitution that I believe that is the jewel of the crown of Chavismo, because that differentiates Chavismo from many other socialist projects around there. And I believe that we need to improve that level of the state, of the new state that we are trying to build. And of course, it has been heavily affected by the sanctions, by the lack of resources, by the economic crisis resulted from the U.S. sanctions. But the President Maduro has been announcing recently, actually a few months ago, we had an election, a free election of people deciding, voting for the projects that they needed the most in their community. And even actually after the announcement of his electoral victory last Sunday, the 28th, he also announced that we were going to have a new communal elections, I believe that in October. So, I mean, those are the things that has been built by Chavismo that changed completely the way of the structure of the state that we had before Hugo Chavez.
Thank you, Jesus. And we just have a few minutes left here, and I have a couple of questions, and Brian may have a question, but we're going to cover all of them, right? Here's my first question to you. Before we jumped on and we started recording, we were talking about the connections between Zionists and the right wing in Venezuela. I was hoping you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, I believe that the compass in the U.S. needs to know that our the so-called leader of the Venezuelan right-wingers, Maria Corina Machado, is a Zionist. I mean, if you go into her X account, you will see what I'm talking about, what I'm about to tell you. I mean, there was an interview that she had a few months ago with a Israeli TV network where she said that if she was, she didn't say it that way. She said that when I become the president of Venezuela, I will move the embassy of Venezuela in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The problem is that we don't have right now diplomatic relations with Israel since several years ago because of the Zionism and the aggression against the Palestinian people. But before moving the embassy, she first is going to have to resume diplomatic relations. So that says a lot about who she is. She also published a few months ago a statement of support to Netanyahu after the Al-Aqsa flood operation launched by the Palestinian resistance, and that's a clear evidence of who she is. What else? Also, you can find in her timeline that there's an agreement that she signed maybe a couple of years ago with the Likud party, which is the party that supports Netanyahu in Israel. And it's like it's like best friend forever's agreement between her organization here in Venezuela and the Likud. So she is a Zionist agent that is in favor of the genocide that the occupation entity is launching against mostly civilian, armless civilian in Palestine, and she will become in the very probable scenario that she becomes one of these years the president of Venezuela, a new Milei or Bolsonaro. Milei is the Argentinian president Javier Milei, or Jair, or something similar to Jair Bolsonaro, the former president of Brazil, that were pretty Zionist also. So that's what I could tell you very briefly about that.
Thank you. And in this question, we're going to take it back a little bit. About 22 years now, this show is about labor. And as I mentioned to you already, we talk about strikes a lot. And here, we also talk about very strategic strikes, and how some workers have, very strategic power within an economy. And so this question goes back to 2002, and it speaks to some of the disruptions that you were speaking of a little earlier, when there was a general strike of oil workers in Venezuela. And from what I understand, and this is where this is where the question starts kicking in, that was a strike that was supported by and orchestrated by the United States. So I just wanted to check in on that, for myself, so that I have better knowledge, and also so our listeners can learn what was the effect of that, socially, economically, politically. What was the effect of that strike, and was it sponsored by the U.S.?
Yes, I mean, just a few weeks after the 2002 coup against Hugo Chavez, and that happened on April 2002. A few months later, I believe that it was in September, October 2002, the right-wingers launched what they call the general strike, which was not a strike at all. It was actually just what you call in the US a lockdown. I mean, basically, they were the owners of the companies that decided to close their businesses, their fabrics, their stores, in an attempt to oust President Chavez. And they were joined by the executive, the top rank official in the oil industry, PDVSA. So they, of course, mainstream media in the US called them a general strike, but in reality, it was what you call, I believe, in the US, a lockdown, like a decision taken from the up to the bottom, instead of what usually a strike is, which is something that comes from the bottom up. So they were trying again to oust President Hugo Chavez, and they put the economy of the country again at risk. They basically stopped oil production in Venezuela for several months. The strike was defeated, I believe, in January 2003. So we spent like 3 or 4 months with no oil production, and the damage to the Venezuelan economy was significant. I believe that the GDP went down like 9% the year. I mean, in 2002, as a response to that crazy move launched by a group, especially the most important part was this group of executive, the top-ranked executive of our main oil company, that they claimed that they were apolitical, and that they love the country, and that they were technocrats. And at the end of the day, they committed one of the most criminal political acts that Venezuela has seen in its history. So that's a brief explanation of that chapter in our very moved political life, during Chavismo.
Yeah, thank you for that. You always gotta be a little suspicious when the US media is applauding a general strike somewhere else, seeing how they don't exactly applaud any strike here in the
Absolutely.
US. So
Absolutely.
anyway, Brian, do you have any further questions? That's all for me tonight.
Yes, Brother Jesus, can you speak to the role and the relationships that, especially in relationship to Cuba and for a variety of reasons, the relationships with Venezuela, with Iran, Russia, and China, and of course, this is to a U.S. audience and hopefully this gets out broader than a U.S. audience. But some of these issues are not really discussed in a serious manner because in the United States, the media is controlled by the capitalists. We try to use the podcast to really ask these types of questions just to give a flavor for like why is Venezuela, uh, working with countries like Cuba, a socialist nation, and also others such as Iran and China, and to some extent Russia as well.
Yes, yes. That's a good question because, I mean, first, because the mainstream media, Washington narrative is that Russia and China are the enemies of the world. And the other narrative that they launch is that communism is bad, and socialism is bad. And, within that framework, Venezuela, since the arrival of Hugo Chavez, have built a strong alliance with Cuba first, then Nicaragua, China, even India, and Russia. I mean, there was a shift. We did not abandon giving priority to our diplomatic relations with the U.S. The U.S. was the one that decided, uh, after multiple, interventionist moves to affect the diplomatic relations between our two countries. But the reality at the end of the day is that the U.S. is in decline. That the world is changing and is moving to our path different to the Western world path that mainstream keeps trying, hard to keep alive, but that everyone knows that is not the same scene that it was 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. So that's a reality. Every analyst, expert in geopolitical, analysis can tell you that that's a fact that is undisputable. Of course, that's something that those kind of, international balance of powers do not change from one day to another. It's going to be a very slow process, as it usually is in international relations. But people are noticing that is happening, and that's a clear indication that is not a lie. And for that, under that reality, the BRICS, this union of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa became to light, and came to light, and Venezuela is trying hard to become a member of BRICS, like many other countries. Actually, a few months ago, BRICS that we initially consisted only of these 5 countries, what expanded to, I believe they were 10 more countries. And Venezuela, what it's trying to do right now is take into consideration that reality in the international relations. We are trying to promote and strengthening of the BRICS and even joining BRICS. And we in Venezuela expect that maybe next October, in October, there's going to be a BRICS summit in Kazan in Russia. And yes, a few hours after President Maduro was announced to be reelected, President Putin sent an invitation to President Maduro to participate in this summit. And many Venezuelans expect that Venezuela might become a full member of BRICS this year. and that will also change the balance of power. Actually, President Maduro announced a few days ago that if the gringos keep promoting coup d'etats in Venezuela, all the business deals that Venezuela still have with U.S. corporations are going to be transferred to countries, corporations or countries. So after that announcement, after Maduro said that, the day before Maduro said that, there was this statement by Blinken saying that Edmundo González, the right-wing candidate, was the legitimate president in Venezuela. He basically named Edmundo González as a president. But the day after Maduro announced that, the Speaker of the State of the Department of State, I forgot his name, he said that the U.S. is monitoring the situation in Venezuela. He somehow backtrack on the U.S. government has been, of course, he is behind the coup attempt. He is behind these recent destabilizations attempts in Venezuela, but they have been trying to play more carefully this time. I believe that first because they launched this crazy Guaido project. We have not talked about that. That's a long story, but they basically in 2019 recognized a crazy guy that stand up in a corner in the street of Caracas, and he said that he was the interim president of Venezuela. And after that, they launched this massive, aggressive campaign of attacks against Venezuela, which only had some sort of correlate, or it was believed outside Venezuela, because meanwhile, President Maduro was the only authority in the country, recognizable authority in the country. But that allowed the U.S. to take control of Citgo, which belongs to Venezuela. And after that, it was seized by the U.S. It took control of foreign bank accounts that we have abroad, and we are talking about billions of dollars in those accounts. They took control of like $2 or $3 billion worth of gold that we had in the Bank of England. So they control all that money. The U.S. control of that all that money, and the U.S. paid our right-winger politicians with the money that they seized from that crazy move. But it's complicated. It's a long story in which we need like hours to, develop all those issues.
Yeah, thank you. So Rick's going to close us out. Just a couple. Can you give us a couple of publications that listeners can go to find out either background information, historical information, or day-by-day updates that are happening in analysis in Venezuela or about Venezuela? Do you have a couple of publications?
Yes, I mean, our working Orinoco Tribune, I believe that is amazing. I believe that people should go to orinocotribune.com, and I believe that we are the only source in English language that covers Venezuelan issues with regular day-to-day, up-to-date information about what's happened in Venezuela, not only in Venezuela, but also in South America, in Latin America, and the global South, with news and opinion. But also VenezuelaAnalysis.com is another good source of information about Venezuela in English. I mean, that we too are the only sources based in Venezuela with information in English about the political life with an anti-imperialist perspective. Of course, you can have a bunch of right-wing outlets out there that are gonna, tell you the same thing that you can read in the Washington Post and New York Times or other outlets. But, these are good alternative sources. There are good organizations like the Alliance for Global Justice, Good Justice, Struggle La Lucha is a good organization, also friend of us, I believe. The reality is that there are not too many. That is sad, and that says a lot about how difficult it is to promote initiative, communicational, journalistic initiatives like the ones that we are launching in Orinoco Tribune or Venezuela Analysis. But I suggest people to take a look at those websites.
Well, thank you. Thank you for chatting with us, Jesus Rodriguez Espinoza. It was a great pleasure having you on here, very informative. And for the benefit of our listeners, this is the spirit of internationalism. You know, we want to hand the microphone over to other working class people who have had their boots on the ground or are from a different land, something like that, so we can learn and understand and build movements and build solidarity, or just at least be informed. So thank you always for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, to share, to talk about this podcast with your fellow workers, your friends, your family, whoever it may be. Thank you once again, Jesus, for being on with us. Love and solidarity to all. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.